Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you from the studios of 91.7 FM, KALW in San Francisco's oldest, most innovative, by far coolest radio station.
Continuing conversations that begin in that hotbed of philosophy and curmudgeon-like grouchiness, Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
Speak for yourself. I'm not a curmudgeon-like grouch. But our topic today is a curmudgeon-like grouch and a great philosopher, just like you, John. A curmudgeon, but a great philosopher, Schopenhauer. I know you like Schopenhauer. What do you like so much about Schopenhauer?
Well, you know, Schopenhauer's been one of my favorite philosophers at two different phases in my life. When I was a teenager, I read Will Durant's Story of Philosophy, a great book for teenagers to read. And I was really attracted to this curmudgeon with his very pessimistic view of life. It fit my teenage angst and so forth and so on. And I didn't pay too much attention to Schopenhauer for a long time. Then I read Irv Yalom's book, The Schopenhauer Cure. I've been digging into Schopenhauer since then. Great philosopher.
Yeah, I agree he's a great philosopher. He says he's got this, his major work is the world as will and idea. Some people translate that will and representation. But the idea part, I kind of understand that he gets from Kant. You know, what is the world? You might think it's something independent of us, but Kant says, no, it's something entirely dependent on us. It's actually our creation, our idea, our representation. And it has no independent, at least the world that we experience and know has no independent existence. Where does the will part come from, John?
Well, what you say is quite right. Schopenhauer, like all the Germans influenced by Kant, but also like the later empiricists, Berkeley and Hume, saw the world that the ordinary world, the world of objects extended in space and time, things, deaths, other people's bodies, as ideas, as basically mental. You might think of it as a shared illusion, or you might say, well, it's not really an illusion because it's shared, but at any rate, basically mental. So the world as idea was not a terribly original contribution of Schopenhauer's. But Kant, for example, thought that the cause of this phenomenal world, this world as idea, was some noumenal thing that we couldn't know the nature of. Schopenhauer thought we could know the nature of it because we were part of it. We were part of will, endeavor, blind force, and that's the nature of nature. That's the underlying essence of everything. So the world is will and idea.
It's kind of a strange, it's an interesting idea, but it's kind of a jarring idea in some ways, because his notion of will doesn't just cover human will, but the blind forces of impersonal nature. So, example, gravity operating is an expression of this will, which is the thing in itself. But you know what I wonder, where does the grouchiness come from? I mean, why does that give rise to grouchiness?
Well, that's a good question, because you might think Hume's philosophy in some ways isn't so different from Schopenhauer's, but he wasn't a grouch at all. He enjoyed life. But Schopenhauer was also influenced by Indian philosophy, by Eastern philosophy. He was one of the first great exponents of that in the Western tradition. And he saw that this will took the form of cycles of desire, disappointment, and boredom. And that the idea of true happiness as being a release from this appealed to him greatly. And maybe that's not really grouchiness, but it certainly comes across as grouchiness. And he also didn't seem to like most other people whom he called bipeds.
Yeah. So the will, this kind of impersonal will, just gives rise to incessant striving and disappointment and boredom in us, and we got to get out of it. This was a very, in some ways, influential doctrine. I mean, once people started paying attention to it, it had a great influence on lots of artists. And our roving philosophical reporter Amy Standen explored some of Schopenhauer's influence. She takes us to the opera.
In the final scene of the Richard Wagner opera Tristan and Isolde, on the brink of death herself, holds the body of her dying lover in her arms. This is tragic music, but it's also triumphant. For these two doomed lovers, death is the only way out of their excruciating desire for each other. To drown, to founder, unconscious, sings Isolde, utmost rapture.
Nietzsche has this wonderful metaphor where he says that in Schopenhauer, music becomes a telephone from the beyond, sort of directly tapping in to the inner essence of the metaphysical world or something like that.
Lanier Anderson is a professor of philosophy at Stanford University.
It's not just that it expresses striving in the way that people ordinarily experience it. It expresses this particular striving that, though it's not just our striving, but the striving of everything.
Wagner was very much under the influence of Schopenhauer when he wrote Tristan and Isolde. He'd read Schopenhauer's theory that life is nothing but a pendulum, swinging between the pain of unfulfilled desire and boredom.
Once we fulfill our desires, then we are sated, and the striving is quieted momentarily, but we immediately sink into boredom. So the two basic options for human life are pain and boredom. It's really a very deeply pessimistic vision. What's at the end of it is nothingness. Because existence is so terrible, the only thing that would be good is to get out of it. As long as you're alive, because willing is your ultimate inner nature, there's still going to be that little bit of desire left. And the only way to have things go really well is to eliminate that. And by eliminating that, you also eliminate yourself. In Schopenhauer, there is no God. And the world is terrible. The world is not a happy place that is the product of a fundamentally good supreme being. The world is something that ought not to exist.
Schopenhauer may be the most pessimistic of philosophers, but he doesn't always sound like it.
Schopenhauer's ire against the world, his indignance against how unjust everything is, that very thing kept seducing him back to enjoyment about life. It's clear when you read his books that he had a great time sitting down at his desk and coming up with new ways to explain how really rotten everything is.
You could say the same thing about Wagner. He may have accepted Schopenhauer's belief that life is full of pain and suffering, but that didn't stop him from composing an 18-hour opera, carrying on an affair with the wife of his benefactor, driving himself into bankruptcy. Just because life is terrible doesn't mean you can't enjoy it.
Yeah, that's another thing Nietzsche says about him. He says, yeah, you think Schopenhauer's a pessimist, but in reality, he played the flute every day after dinner.
For Philosophy Talk, this is Amy Standen.
I'm John Perry. Beside me is Ken Taylor. We just heard from Amy Standen and Lanier Anderson about Schopenhauer, and Amy made this great statement that just because life is terrible doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Now, I think there's wisdom in that, don't you, Ken?
Well, I do think there's wisdom in that, and I actually love Nietzsche's one-line refutation of Schopenhauer's pessimism, because he repeats it twice, in I think it's in Beyond Good and Evil. He says, well, he's such a pessimist, but every dinner after night, he played the flute. And then he says with emphasis, he played the flute, as if, thus I refute Schopenhauer. Anyway, to join us to talk about this, somebody actually who's explored Schopenhauer and Nietzsche in great depth, we're joined by Dr. Irving Yalom, a world-renowned psychotherapist and author of many books, including Love's Executioner, When Nietzsche Wept, Lying on the Couch, and his most recent, The Schopenhauer Cure. Irv, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
You heard us give a little primer of Schopenhauer's philosophy before Amy's piece, and the idea of the world as will and idea. That's the title of his great book. Can you tell us a little bit more about what he meant by world, will, and idea, and why it came to fascinate you?
Well, the reason that Schopenhauer most fascinated me were the aspects of Schopenhauer that really had to do with existence, with the way that we live in the world, with just the kinds of things you were talking about a few minutes ago about the world being such a terrible place. Or, for example, about the idea that the only thing there is really pain and then boredom. Is that true? Is it true for him? Is it true for everybody? I think it was true for him. Is it true for others, too?
Do you think that, it sounds like, Schopenhauer represents that conclusion that there's just pain and that his life is this pendulum constantly swinging back between pain and boredom as a kind of an outcome, a consequence of his metaphysical views about the world as will and idea. It sounds like maybe you think it was just some kind of projection of his own psyche, his own neuroses, or something like that. Do you think it's a deep philosophical consequence of his view, or do you think it's just projected on?
Well, that's one of the reasons I started this book. Was Schopenhauer such a pained, fearful, neurotic person that really led to the kind of philosophy that he wrote, or was it vice versa? Discovering the truth about certain things led him to that worldview.
Yeah.
Well, let's take one very famous story about Schopenhauer, which I gather is true, and that's that when he had a job, which wasn't for very long, as
a day,
his only job,
his only job he ever had as a private docent. That's a lecturer in Germany that's only paid if the class gets some enrollment. The first semester, he put his class right opposite of Hegel's and got about 5 students, and the next semester he got none at all.
You have to say something about that. Hegel was at that time the most prominent philosopher in continental Europe at the zenith of his career.
Right, and Schopenhauer thought he was a complete mountebank charlatan. But why would a person who's so anxious and insecure have so much hubris, or was he trying to defeat himself? I'm asking you, I guess, to give me a psychoanalytic interpretation of Schopenhauer at this point in his life.
Well, I can tell you that it wasn't new for him. It went back to adolescence. I mean, we have letters from his parents saying the same thing to him. Why do you have to be so disagreeable? Why do you need to challenge everyone? Why can't you accept something that other people have to say? So it was not new. It was very predictable. He was very grandiose. He was convinced of his genius all his life. I mean, in many ways, he was quite right. But the amount of rage that he had, especially towards Hegel, and also one of Hegel's colleagues, Fichte. I mean, we see his notes when he was taking philosophy as a student just filled with scurrilous remarks and insults towards those two.
I want to move us off the psychoanalysis just a little bit, though, because I want to explore the philosophy a little bit and then get into, your novel and all kinds of stuff. But so he's got this deeply pessimistic view, right? In some ways, at least it sounds deeply pessimistic, and it's supposed to be a consequence of just what the world is, right? The world is idea. That's this shared illusion kind of thing. The representations in our mind, not independent of us. And it's also will, this ceaseless striving. And it's almost supposed to follow directly from that life is yuck. I mean, I don't quite get that.
And we might add, Ken, that the important thing seems to be the will part, not the idea part. That is,
right.
you could take a contemporary, what we might call realist point of view of the world, which emphasizes evolution and that life and consciousness evolved, but still the principles by which they evolved are very much this mindless willed and forces of nature, ultimately the same forces that push gravity and then the survival of the fittest, all this mindless stuff. So if Schopenhauer is right in being a pessimist, giving up the phenomenalism, the idea that the world is just our idea, doesn't really help us. So it's important to get to the bottom of it.
The will part is supposed to be the core.
Well,
the world is supposed to be the core.
The other two, though, I mean, even the world is illusion, all reality is illusion, does kind of leave one deeply unsettled. I mean, there's nothing underneath us. There's just a kind of nothingness. It has to do with almost too much freedom. We want some sort of structure. So I think that may have contributed.
Well, there is that, but Kant also had that, except he thought there was something unknowable that was the ultimate ground of our existence, but we could never know anything about it. But Kant was a very optimistic guy.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're a realist, then you believe that not just the earth is real and the stuff that's kind of human-centered, but that we're just really a little teeny bit of flotsam in this sea of jetsam in this huge meaningless thing. So I don't know, illusion or the horrible reality that science discloses to us, which is more edifying.
I think we're gonna have to dig a little more deeply into this. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our guest is Irv Yalom, author of the Schopenhauer Cure. We're trying to zero in on what is the real source of Schopenhauer's deep pessimism.
And out there in the world, there's all kinds of people that have tried to achieve happiness in all sorts of ways that are listening to this program. What's your idea? Do you think Schopenhauer's advice for living life, kind of getting released from desire and the cycle of excitement and boredom, the ideas he got from Eastern religion, are those good, or is kind of more the Western notion of involvement and having a lot of desires and satisfying as many of them as you possibly can, getting an iPod today and then being tired of it tomorrow? Which is the better route to happiness, or is there some golden mean? Give us a call and tell us.
We'll take your calls after the break. Philosophy Talk. We'll be right back.
Thursday for a change, a little more nothing. Friday once more nothing. Come on.
The Fugs with their great anthem to nihilism, Nothing. I'm John Barry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. John, you've been trying to get that song on the air for a year now. You finally succeeded. We're discussing Arthur Schopenhauer. Join us.
The number is 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Outside the Bay Area, call toll-free at 1-800-525-9917 or email us at comments@philosophytalk.org.
Our guest today is Dr. Irv Yalom, author of the Schopenhauer Cure. Now, look, I want to go back to the point we were making just before the break. I want to dig into why Schopenhauer is such a pessimist. You know, there's the one, he's just a pessimistic guy. It's just his psychology. But I think it's supposed to follow from his philosophy. And I'll focus on this relentless desiring thing from the relentless will. He says this thing about, nature has no use for individuals. All it cares that the species reproduces, and when the individual's done its job, could just as soon perish as far as nature is concerned. So the source of our being, nature objectified, the will objectified, has no need for us. It's just temporary tools, right? But how does it work? It makes us desire all these things just for nature's purposes, not for any purposes of our own. And I guess it's that relentless desiring where the desires come from some edict that has nothing to do with us, that is supposed to make the satisfaction of the desires kind of pointless or something, at least for us.
But does it inevitably point that way? I mean, I must admit that nature was done with me some time ago. I don't intend to have any more children or propagate my genes anymore. It hasn't really bothered me much. I still enjoy life about as much as I ever did. So it's not clear it was a logical conclusion that he drew from his godless vision.
But it seems to me there's a presupposition. I wonder what you and John and Irv think about this. It seems to me a kind of presupposition is that, these desires that matter to us. I said on our blog, the blog.philosophytalk.org, I wrote a blog entry this morning. I said, well, look, having desires does something for me. And plus, when the desires are married with knowledge, it enables me to set myself projects. But he seems to think these projects need some kind of vindication from nature. And everywhere if I turn to nature for vindication, nature just says, I don't care about your project. What do you think?
Well, how much of an audience did he need? I mean, he always talked about how awful it was to be driven by fame, yet he was very much himself. He needed an audience. I mean, I think the answer to some of your questions is in his own autobiography. I mean, I think if we take a look at the kind of life he led and the kind of parents he had and his interaction and his father's suicide when he was 16 and being in bondage to a profession he didn't want to follow. I mean, I think this is where some of his pessimism came from. See, I think he and Nietzsche start off with the same data, and yet they both went in very opposite directions.
What do you mean? What data did they start out together?
The data of looking at life very accurately, of having no supernatural beliefs, of looking at the reality of death, of looking at nothingness, and yet Nietzsche ended up embracing life, and Schopenhauer ended up negating it. Why was that?
Well, because Nietzsche saw that the bare urges within us, I think, the desiring within us, the will to power within us, that was the creative force. That created values kind of out of nothing. So, and Schopenhauer didn't seem to think that values could come out of nothing, couldn't just come from our creating.
He was a deeply, I guess, not a humanist. I mean, he was a humanist in thinking that humans didn't have any kind of, weren't the ulterior products of some greater mentality like God, but he didn't really think that values that emanated from the human condition were real. So
they were just illusions or something like that.
Another contrast would be with Hume. I keep bringing up Hume, but Hume didn't have this passion that Nietzsche and Schopenhauer had, this Germanic, dark vision. And it was just a good-humored Englishman, and yet on his deathbed, Boswell comes up and says, well, I mean, how can you still be an atheist and just believe that there's going to be nothing? And he said, well, there was nothing for thousands of years where I was born, and that wasn't so bad. And besides, I wouldn't want to go to heaven and meet all these jerks I knew. So he had in many ways, a similar metaphysic, but not the pessimism.
I want to shift the conversation a little bit, Irv. I mean, what's a warm, generous person like you, which I get from reading your books, because your group therapy is like this big group kind of involvement, everybody helping each other and all that stuff, and it seems like deeply, caring and attached to the well-being of others. What's a groovy guy like you doing, writing a book about a jerk like Schopenhauer and putting him in group therapy? I mean, what's the point of that? Because he was like disengaged.
Well, maybe
group therapy is all about engagement.
We don't want to ruin people who haven't read your book, the plot, but maybe you ought to say a little bit about the plot.
Yeah, well, I'm not only interested in group therapy. I mean, I have a double set of interests always in my field, which is an existential approach to psychotherapy. Group therapy is a little different. You know, you're working there with relationships between people. But in a sense, one of the questions I was asking, if we had a character like Schopenhauer, and you look at the kinds of things he said about his relationships with other people and his inability to be with them, could you imagine anyone less likely to want to be in a therapy group? I mean, wouldn't it be a kick to get him in a therapy group?
Yeah.
Or if a therapy group could help him, it could help anybody in the world.
Right.
So
you're trying to prove the power of group therapy.
That's one thing I was trying to do in this book.
So you kind of trick your Schopenhauer character Philip into being in group therapy.
Oh, I had to trick him.
Very adroitly done.
Yeah, I had to trick him. He would never go into
there's this thing. I mean, this is important. This is a deep thing about Schopenhauer. There's two kinds of relations we can have to the will. We can affirm the will. It's the will to life. Or he talks about the denial of the will. And he seems to think the key to survival in the world is denying the will, is getting rid of desires. Right. It's rising above it and not being moved by all that stuff somehow. You know, and
like the Buddha.
Yeah, like the Buddha, like the Stoics, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not without precedent in the history of philosophy. So you have desires, and if you can't satisfy them, it's awful. But and you want to do away with the awfulness? Well, you can try to satisfy them, or you can just get rid of the desire. Right?
Is it possible that he had too much desire, that he was a driven man, that he was quite compulsive, that he may even been sexually compulsive? There's a case that could be made for that. Maybe he had painful desires in a way that other people don't.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking with Irv Yalom about Schopenhauer and his pessimistic view and his metaphysics and group therapy. You can join our discussion by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. Outside the Bay Area, if you're listening anywhere in America, you can call us toll-free at 1-800-525-9917. Or last but certainly not least, you can send us an email by sending it to comments@philosophytalk.org. I think you have an email there.
Yeah, I've got one email here, Ken, that's going to even broaden our philosophical horizons more. Hi, guys. Is there a connection to be made between Schopenhauer and Kierkegaard? Maybe that's the topic of Irv's next book. I guess not. I'm drawn to both thinkers' willingness to plumb the depths, leaving no stone unturned. But how do we deal with Schopenhauer's atheism and Kierkegaard's religiosity? Thanks, Pete in San Francisco. Well, I mean, I'm no Kierkegaard expert. I have read some Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard was a very committed Christian who thought that you had to believe, and the more unlikely it was, the more true your faith was. And just off the top of my head, it looks like in that respect they couldn't be more different. Although maybe Kierkegaard's picture that faith had to be completely unmotivated by reason was connected to having some of the same insights that Schopenhauer did. It's just Schopenhauer did a modus ponens, that is, accepted the consequences of his views, and Kierkegaard couldn't quite.
So what do you think about that, John?
Well, I guess I would have to go with Schopenhauer. So
I think I would too. Yeah, and I used to always get in arguments with Rollo May, a very well-known psychologist who's always a Kierkegaard lover and a believer himself. But I've liked the free thinking of Schopenhauer, and he was, because he never had a job. You mentioned that he had a job for 1 year. Because he never had a job, he was free, therefore, to write as he wished. Many professional philosophers could not at the time. They were heavily censored. Their work was heavily censored by religious and governmental sources.
So let's hear from Jerry in Oakland. Jerry, on the phone?
Yep, here I am.
What's your question?
Well, I don't know if it's as much a question as an observation. You're talking about the Buddhists, and I think that was kind of part of what I was going to say is that, the Buddhists talk about transcending the accepted notion that life is suffering and desire will always end in pain, or the pursuit of desire will. There's also the Toltecs, and the Toltecs talk about what they call the dream of the planet or the dream of hell, which is that life as we know it is hell, and that we're not. But once you can experience.
So Jerry, does that fit with your own experience? Do you think life is hell? I mean, you're calling from Oakland. That's a pretty nice place.
I wouldn't reduce it to that formula.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but that as long as we're engaging in fear-based thinking,
mm-hmm.
that we're prone or we're bound to Kierkegaard and Schopenhauer, believing and not believing. I think what it comes down to is people who have themselves experienced transcendent states can say to the people who haven't, well, this is what you're missing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the Buddhists are coming from, and where the Toltecs are coming from.
Okay, let's hear.
You don't get it.
Yeah, let's hear from Herman in San Francisco, and then we'll dig into some of these ideas. Herman, are you there?
Hello there. I am definitely there.
Good. No, you're there. You're there. I'm here.
Yeah, and I think that beauty, that is in the form of art and so on like that, filled the vacuum of boredom. And it was a compensation for pain and boredom. So that's my point.
Well, that's a very interesting point, and that sounds like something that Schopenhauer accepted in his life, even if he doesn't make enough room for it in his philosophy. What do you guys think?
Same thing. He played the flute every morning,
Yeah.
you know, and he loved the arts. He was a great connoisseur of the arts. But, you know, just because some of these things are true, because everyone faces death, you know, that could plunge some people into great despair and great fear. Others might take a very different approach. They might say that if that is so, then the life as we experience now is all the more precious. It's all the more poignant.
Yeah.
We have to enjoy the present moment.
I wonder, though, I do wonder about something. Suppose we took Schopenhauer as giving us universal advice about how to live. And this universal advice was, deny the will, right? End all desiring. What would human life be like? What would human history have been like if the first humans had said, we got all these desires, we set ourselves all these projects, it's all going to end in our own death, and you know, and my individual life, what would we just wouldn't be? So is Schopenhauer recommending that we just unbe? I mean, that doesn't seem like a prescription for human life.
Well, I mean, let's try to rise above the petty concerns of humans that we only have because we're locked into this universal will. Is human life a good thing? For most species, it isn't a good thing. Most species in the world would be far better off if human life died out. Who would it be bad for? The humans that live? No, they're already dead. The humans that don't live? Well, they don't exist. So what's wrong with the end of human life, Ken?
Well, I mean, we care about it. I mean, we care about our lives. And
I'm not suggesting the end of human life and that we just decimate everybody that's already existing.
I understand.
But suppose we overcome this will to propagate it and it just slowly dies off. Who's the loser?
We are. I mean, we care about our lives, and that's the only caring that matters. I mean, the universe doesn't care about animal nature. I mean, by Schopenhauer's life, the will doesn't care about anything. It's all just a restless striving, and it discards what it uses after it's done with it. I mean, you know, look at it from the point of view of the universe at large. The sun could go supernova tomorrow, Irv, and it wouldn't matter to nature, but it matters to us, doesn't it? And isn't that enough?
It matters to us at the moment who are alive. It won't matter to us in a short period of time. I mean, Schopenhauer said that life is just a mold growing over a globe floating in space. And he looked at it as an undesirable thing. He said, you go into the cemetery, knock on any tombstone. Would you ask the people there if you ask the people there, would you want to live again? They'd all say no.
Well, that's his prediction.
Yeah, is that true?
Nietzsche says if you've lived well and you're offered your life again at the end of it, a test of whether you live well, something like this, is whether you would live it over and over again without a single change to infinity.
He'd say you'd bless the person as a god who offered that. Or maybe you might gnash your teeth and say it was demon. But if you could say yes to that, then you've lived right. You've lived without accumulating regrets.
So we got Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, two pretty screwed up people that have a very similar metaphysic but disagree completely on what they would say if you knocked on their tombstone. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. You can call us outside the Bay Area, toll free, 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. You can email us, comments at philosophytalk.org. You can call us inside the Bay Area, 415-841-4134.
So, Irv, you think the power of group therapy, I'll get back to this for a little second, is such that even a curmudgeon like Schopenhauer, whose key to happiness, right, is divorcing from the world, not being attached, extinguishing rather than pursuing desire, it could make even him come out of that. Do you really believe that?
I think he had a terrible yearning to be loved, to be close to other people. He looked back over a period of time at the age of 9 when he lived away from his parents for a year, and always going back to that happy time in life. You know, I started writing this novel because I felt groups had been so misrepresented in the media. They're always presented in a mocking and ridiculing way, and I wanted to show that you lead a long-term group. Right at the heart of that, it's a very magical, powerful experience.
Yeah. I suppose there's part of Schopenhauer's philosophy. Tell me if you think this is right. That makes it amenable to that sort of thing, because he says, take this subject object. The world is just an idea, right? The world is just a representation. But so there's this object that we think about, but it's just a representation. But there's a subject that thinks about it. Now, he says this subject-object duality, that's kind of an illusion itself, right? Especially the idea that there are multiple subjects, because in nature, everything is united. We're kind of all one. So, and in his mature life, he says, the proper form of address to a fellow human being is fellow sufferer or something like that.
He said that, but he only said that once.
Yeah.
I don't think you'll find another charitable, generous comment in all of his work.
But it's not inconsistent with if we're all united in the great thing of nature, then isn't that kind of deeply humanistic in some ways?
And here's another way you might look at it. This is from Janet Stemwedel over the net. She says there's a piece of Schopenhauer's picture that's appealing. Sometimes it feels like we can let ourselves be driven by our desires. Oh, a cookie, rather than having any control. Maybe those desires are just the result of nature and the will to live, and it's very pessimistic. But she goes on, are there none of my desires that are really products of nature or this malign external will to live? Aren't some of my desires true reflections of me and my authentic choices? We could extend that and say, look at the desire for an iPod. That's not due to nature and the will to live. For better or for worse, that's due to human ingenuity.
Oh, but wait a minute. But you're making a bifurcation between human ingenuity and the will to live. I mean, humans just are, and all they're desiring are just are. The objectification of the will, of the noumenal will.
No, humans are a great trick played on nature, right? Nature gave us pleasure so we would propagate, and pain so we wouldn't get eaten. But we avoid pain even when we do dangerous things, and we have the pleasure even when we're not propagating. We're outwitting nature.
Yeah, well, on that note, I'll tell you, you're listening to Philosophy Talk, where John is outwitting nature. We're discussing Arthur Schopenhauer with Dr. Irv Yalom, author of The Schopenhauer Cure. Coming up, we'll drill down further into this subject. Are the relationships in your life a blessing, as lots of philosophers would think, or a burden, as Schopenhauer would say? Does true happiness come from revolting against desire in the world or being engaged? What do you think?
Philosophy Talk, we'll be right back. This is Philosophy Talk. I'm John Perry. Welcome back.
I'm Ken Taylor. We question everything here
except your intelligence.
And we're discussing Arthur Schopenhauer with Irv Yalom. Join us by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Outside the Bay Area, toll free, 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Finally, you can email us comments at philosophytalk.org.
I want to go back to this engagement versus disengagement. I want to ask you, Irv, do you think disengagement, is that a psychological... what's your view about this prescription of Schopenhauer that the key to happiness is disengagement? You see lots of patients. I would think...
Well, that has to do with the title of my book. That's why I'm saying the Schopenhauer Cure, because I mean it in a double way. I mean it that it's the cure that he offers, but also the cure that he needs.
Yeah.
I think it's only a very partial solution, that we are hardwired in such a way we really need to be with others. We need the satisfactions that come from being with others, to be loved and to love. And I think that his unbearable loneliness was an exceedingly important part of his life.
But I suppose you would agree. Well, I know various psychotherapist regimes think that there is such a thing as over-attachment, as not, as being too ego-involved with another or stuff like that.
Oh, right. Absolutely. You start to scan the faces of everyone you talk to just to see what their response will be, and you've lost sight of yourself and your own wishes and impulse. That's going too far in that direction. That's becoming over-dependent on other people. And, of course, that was anathema to Schopenhauer.
So he didn't have a problem with being a caregiver, that sort of thing.
He had no problems with that whatsoever.
We have callers on the line. RK in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, RK.
Hi.
What's your comment or question?
My comment is that in Vedantic philosophy, as well as other ways of thinking. One of the main premises of thought is to be in service to humanity, and beyond being in service, or after you've, let's say, sown your oats, one begins to reflect on the self and the soul, and we leave the I-mindedness behind. In other words, all the things which are just things would tend to distract us throughout our lives. But once we start focusing on others or being in service, which also can include inventing, let's say, iPods, etc., something that's going to benefit humanity, then we begin to become more introspective, and our lives become more fulfilled, simply because...
So let's cut your recommendation down to a pithy comment. Are you more on Schopenhauer's side or not? Sounds like you're in favor of you're in favor of involvement and commitment.
That Schopenhauer needs a little more psychoanalysis. He's kind of, his messages are I feel, are mixed. And
sounds like maybe he could have just started by doing some volunteer work, or maybe scheduled these classes at some point where you get some students coming to his office hours. He might have gotten a little more engaged.
Thanks, R.K. Actually, one of the characters in your book makes a point against Philip, the Schopenhauer character, more or less along this line, that he's only gotten half of the Eastern philosophy right.
That's right.
Because R.K. is right, because it's not just isolate from the world, but do away with your sense of your ego, your sense of I, but that leads you to broader engagement with the others with whom you are united.
Loving kindness is an important part of the Buddhist meditational practice. But there's another thing. There's a part of Schopenhauer that agreed with what the last caller says. I mean, he always thought that since he was a genius, his mission in life would be as a kind of missionary of truth. Yeah. He was bringing his truth to other people.
Yeah. What's that line about genius in Schopenhauer? The ordinary talent aims at a target that others can't miss. Genius aims at a talent that others can't hit.
Yeah.
Genius aims at a target that others can't see.
Others can't see.
Did Schopenhauer think this was important just because he thought truth was important, in which case one could wonder why in his metaphysics is it important? Or because he thought that the approach to life that came out of his insights would be a real service to humanity to reveal to others. Why did he think his work was so important?
Well, I'm not sure about that question, but it's clear that he thought that others were important. That he thought he had to give something to others. That he didn't relate to people in his own life, but he always said that he had close friends, and these were the great men of the past whose books were letters to him.
Well, he got along well with Goethe for a while, I guess, until he decided he could write better stuff about color than Goethe could.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So much for that.
Right.
Dan in San Francisco has a question about Schopenhauer's de-emphasis on desire, as I understand. Is that right, Dan? Welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Yeah, thank you. And the to de-emphasize, it seems his fear of death, and if there really is such a thing of death as death, and I wonder how, Dr. Yalom, how well you feel that he defined death, and do you agree with his definition of death? And obviously, I'm dwelling on that a little bit, but isn't one of our greatest illusions not that the concept of death, but how it's so finite and you can pinpoint it at the end of your life? Doesn't life and death kind of bubble through a person's life as time goes on? That part of you is born and part of you dies, and throughout life, based on your connections with other people, your transitions, and that Schopenhauer, from the little that I know about him,
Well, let me just pick up what you just said a second ago. I think that one of Schopenhauer's major views of death was that death was nothingness. You enter into the same nothingness that you existed in before you were born. And he said in effect that life is a spark between these two vast pools of darkness, and the two vast pools of darkness, the kinds of nothingness, they're identical with one another.
Yeah.
That's taken incidentally right out of Lucretius, who took it out of Epicurus. It's a long-lasting philosophical idea.
Thanks, Dan. Along that line, he says, "Why the eternity before you were born didn't bother you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why should the eternity after you die bother you?
Why are
at
we
all?
so bothered about the second pool of darkness when it's the same as the first?
Right,
we hardly ever think about it.
Ray in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Ray.
Thanks. So far in your discussion, you seem to have accepted the discontinuity between the expressions of Schopenhauer as a human or of a philosopher as a human and the existence of nature as if there were a split or a duality. And one wonders if you can't find in Schopenhauer a reconciliation of the human nature with all of nature, or is this split characteristic of Schopenhauer's thinking?
Thanks, Ray. That's a deep question. You want to tackle it, Irv?
Well, he thought that we were just an individualized part of nature, that nature is there, the life force is there, and each of us are individualized parts of that. And when we die, in a sense, we rejoin the life force. I mean, we don't have any personal consciousness. I'm not sure what kind of comfort that offers to us, but that would be his view. It's a kind of Kent was talking about at the beginning of the program.
Yeah, I think there's clearly an identity between individuals and nature. The question is whether you call it reconciliation, because that usually suggests something comforting for a higher purpose, and I'm not sure he saw it that
Our
way.
conscious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're an expression. We are the objectification of the will, which is nature. I mean, we are nature's object in some sense. We are nature made an object. Right. We are nature made an object to a subject, which is ourselves, right? It's a complicated stuff, but it's not a division, really, between nature and man. It's like, in some sense, a reduction of man to nature.
Yeah, if you take the phenomenalism, that is this idea that the world is our idea, out of it, put it on a more realistic basis, it's a very modernistic philosophy. And so the question that's posed about the pessimism is a good one. I want to mention that there's a lot of more interesting characters in Irv Yalom's book than just Philip, the Schopenhauer guy. There's Pam that goes off to India to actually engage in learning Indian philosophy and learns to breathe real well, and it doesn't, in the end, help her all that much. And a lot of other fascinating guys.
And the dynamic between Pam, I don't want to give away the plot, but the dynamic between Pam and Philip is great. And I actually have to say, the culminating moment at which something happened between them, it moved me to tears. I actually cried. It was really moving her.
Yeah. One of the major things I was trying to explore in this, too, is the whole relationship between philosophy and psychotherapy. There are philosophers now, like the two of you, who are going to be hanging up their shingles and offering clinical philosophical
No.
Many of them exist.
Yeah.
And so I'm raising the question, well, to what extent does philosophy contribute to psychotherapy?
And your argument is, not without a lot of training could a philosopher who's merely mastered the doctrine of some important philosopher translated into psychological practice.
Exactly, and that's why I wanted to have Philip in there in competition with a dynamic therapist who was well trained in the field.
Are you working on your next book, Irv?
Not yet. I'm resting.
You're resting. Okay.
Oh, but that's it. We know that's an unstable point. That means you're bored if Schopenhauer's right.
I think you really ought to look into Hume. I mean,
I have been reading Hume.
Good.
I've been reading Hume and Lucretius again.
Hume and Lucretius. Now, there's a group that was made for therapy if there ever was one.
Well, this has been a really fun conversation. Our guest has been Dr. Irv Yalom, author of the really fine book. I heartily recommend it to you, The Schopenhauer Cure. Irv, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much, Irv. And we also want to thank all the callers and emailers that sent us interesting stuff, or we're going to make good comments, but we just couldn't get to all of you.
So, John, what are your thoughts today? What do you think? What have you learned? Where have we been?
Well, we talked about Schopenhauer and what he meant by the idea, the world as will and idea, the title of his great book, and then we talked with Irv Yalom about whether Schopenhauer's metaphysics and the gloomy picture of human life that he drew from it could really be the basis for therapy. as his character Philip in the Schopenhauer Cure thinks.
Yeah, we did.
Or more the subject that requires therapy.
Well, he thinks I think Irv thinks that both, but the Schopenhauer, the person requires therapy, and Schopenhauer's doctrines, I think Irv thinks they could possibly be the basis for therapy, but not just on their own. Not just a philosopher just can't go from his. I had to say this philosophical counseling stuff. I think it's a bunch of hooey. I mean, I think philosophy has deep insights into life and how to live, but you can't just translate it into a therapeutic practice.
Well,
easily.
Probably hooey is to be found in every form of therapy somehow.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss it, although I don't think I would pay too much good money for it yet. The other thing I learned as I've been thinking is that, the philosophers that are most studied nowadays in our department and others from the history of philosophy tend to be ones that don't really share a very modern vision, people like Kant and Hegel and so forth. Whereas you take Hume, Nietzsche, and Schopenhauer, and you really have people who are struggling with the basic question of how you find value or don't find value in a universe that is in some sense meaningless. We ought to focus more on these guys.
I really think that's a very, very deep point. I mean, I think it's extremely deep. I think in nature, I think Schopenhauer has a deep problem. I think he's right. In nature, there is no valuing. Nature is not on its own a source of value or valuing. Nature is indifference. It's this relentless, indifferent force. But we are its creations. We are its creations. Does that mean that we have no value? That there is no such thing as human valuing? I think the answer to that is no. But it's a deep question how it can be no. We have value even though the thing which gives rise to us is utterly devoid of value, right? And it's because there's the creative power of our will and our desiring and our intellect. It can create values ex nihilo. I think that's a deep point that Schopenhauer missed.
And I want to call your attention to our blog, Philosophy Talk the blog, our motto, cogito ergo blog. I think, therefore, I blog. You can go to www.theblog.philosophytalk.org, or you can just get there from our ordinary website. Ken's got a blog on Schopenhauer. You can read it, comment on it, and let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and here to have the last word on Schopenhauer is Ian Shows, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. Immanuel Kant posited an unknowable reality behind our observed reality. Arthur Schopenhauer, born 1788, died 1860, claimed to know that unknowable reality. It is the will. The human will rules the intellect, tormenting us with our own desires. We do not live life for the pleasure of it, but because the will to live is irresistible, instinctive, and irrational. This philosophy appealed greatly to two of his later fans, Friedrich Nietzsche and Richard Wagner. Schopenhauer, as a young man, was apprenticed to German merchants, expected to take over his father's business. Then his father died, apparently a suicide in 1807, and the inheritance made it possible for Schopenhauer to pursue the life of the mind. He was the first Western philosopher to incorporate Eastern thought. His themes involved real life, not abstract philosophical puzzles, and unlike previous philosophies, Schopenhauer's revealed a deep pessimism. In Schopenhauer's time, unfortunately for him, readers preferred Hegel, his colleague at Heidelberg University. Schopenhauer hated Hegel, whether for his philosophy or his popularity is not clear. He did write, however, quote, "If I were to say that the so-called philosophy of this fellow Hegel is a pseudo-philosophy paralyzing all mental powers, stifling all real thinking, and by the most outrageous misuse of language putting in its place the hollowest, most senseless, thoughtless, most stupefying verbiage, I should be quite right," unquote. Unlike many philosophers, Schopenhauer wrote in a direct manner, and was often quite funny, especially when he was being nasty. And he was a nasty man. Vain, antisocial, curmudgeonly, and misogynist. Read his essay on women, if you dare. He considered 5/6 of all humanity worth only contempt. The story goes that he pushed an old woman down a flight of stairs because her chatting with a friend irritated him. She broke a leg, and he was forced to provide her pension for the remainder of her life. When she died, the story continues, he replied to the letter giving him the news, "Obit unus abit." She dies, the burden departs. In later life, he found fame, but it did not dent his bitter self-regard. After a heart attack, he told a friend, quote, "If at times I thought myself unfortunate, it is because of a confusion and error. I have mistaken myself for someone else. Who am I really? I am the author of the world as will and representation. I am the one who has given an answer to the mystery of being that will occupy the thinkers of future centuries. That is who I am, and who can dispute it in the years of life that still remain for me," unquote. He died soon after. Schopenhauer had a major influence on not only Nietzsche, but Wittgenstein, Jung, Freud, Einstein, Thomas Mann, and Adolf Hitler. I gotta go.
Wow, Ken, my head is dizzy from 60 seconds of rapid-fire philosophy.
If your head is dizzy, that means you've got a conundrum in your mind, and we can solve it for you, can't we, John?
Yes. Go to our webpage.
Conundrums at philosophytalk.org, or hit that conundrums button on the webpage. We won't promise to solve your problem, but we will give you lots of new ways to think about it.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University.
Our executive producer is Gordon Earl.
Special thanks to Dave Fusaro, Nicole Sawaya, Ben Temshin, and Alan Farley.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association and from various groups at Stanford University.
And even more support from the Friends of Philosophy Talk and from the members of KALW Information Radio San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our funders.
The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.